I was trained to face evil, but nothing prepared me for this. The scratching started before I even reached the door. Not outside, not from some animal clawing at wood. It came from inside the walls, deep inside, as if something with long, deliberate fingers was dragging its nails along the backside of the drywall, following me as I walked down the hallway. I stopped. The scratching stopped. I took one more step, and it started again, perfectly in time with my footstep just slightly behind me and to the left. The hallway light above me buzzed once, went dim, then snapped back to full brightness with a faint popping sound. I remember standing there, my breath caught in my chest, staring at a crack in the wall that I could have sworn was not there a second ago. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door closed. Not a slam. Just a slow, careful click, the way someone would close a door if they were trying not to be heard. And then, underneath all of it, a sound so quiet I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Breathing. Rhythmic. What? Coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I didn't move. My hand was already on the rosary in my pocket, and my fingers were squeezing the beads so hard the little silver crucifix cut into my palm. The temperature in the hallway had dropped. Not the kind of cold you feel in a drafty old house. This was pointed, targeted, like standing in front of an open freezer. And in that moment, before I had spoken to anyone, before I had even seen the girl they called me about, I knew. Whatever was inside that house was already aware of me. It had been waiting. My name is Father David Marin. Or it was. I don't go by Father anymore. I haven't held Mass in 4 years. I haven't set foot inside a church in nearly 3. The diocese doesn't list me as retired or on leave. Officially, I simply stopped. No explanation. No formal letter. I just didn't show up one Sunday morning, and when the bishop's office called, I told them I was done. They asked if I was ill. I said no. They asked if there was a personal issue. I said no. They asked if I'd lost my faith. And I told them the truth, that I hadn't lost my faith. My faith had been taken from me, stripped away like wallpaper torn off a wall, and what was underneath was something I was never supposed to see. I'm recording this because I need someone to understand what happened to me. Not because I want sympathy and not because I want to warn anyone, though maybe that's part of it too. I need to say it out loud because it has been living inside me, the memory, the experience, whatever you want to call it, like something coiled up in the back of my skull, pressing against the inside of my eyes when I try to sleep. And I've learned that the things we don't speak eventually speak for us, in ways we can't control. If you're into real horror stories like this, consider subscribing. This channel is new and it honestly helps a lot. Before that night, I had been a priest for 17 years. 12 of those years involved what the church quietly refers to as ministry of deliverance, which is the polite way of saying I dealt with cases of suspected demonic activity. I want to be very clear about something. The church does not hand this work to just anyone. You don't volunteer. You are selected after years of theological study, psychological evaluation, and, most importantly, demonstrated temperament. The church wants priests who are skeptical first, faithful second. The vast majority of cases referred to me over those 12 years turned out to be mental illness, substance abuse, domestic trauma, or some combination of all three. I helped those people find proper treatment. I prayed with them when they asked me to. I never once assumed the devil was involved when a simpler explanation existed. In 12 years, I performed the full rite of exorcism exactly 3 times. Each one was harrowing. Each one took something out of me that I never fully recovered. But each one ended. The darkness receded. The person was freed. I went home, sat alone in my study, drank a glass of bourbon, and thanked God that His power was greater than anything I had encountered. The 4th time was different. The call came in October. I remember because the trees along my street had just turned that particular shade of amber that makes everything look like a photograph from the 1970s. A woman named Catherine Bellows had contacted the diocese through her parish priest, Father Auletta, at St. Jerome's in Warwick, a small town about 2 hours south of where I was stationed. Father Auletta had been hearing Catherine's concerns for about 6 weeks before he escalated it. Her daughter, Megan, 23 years old, had been exhibiting behavior that Catherine described as not like her. I remember reading that phrase in the intake document and thinking how unremarkable it sounded. Parents said that about their children all the time. Megan was the middle child of 3. She'd graduated from a state university the year before with a degree in elementary education. She had a job lined up at a school near her parents' home. She was described by everyone who knew her as kind, patient, funny, a little shy but warm once you got to know her. She went to Mass every Sunday with her mother. She played guitar in the folk group at the evening service. She had a cat named Oliver. I mention these details because it matters that you understand who Megan was before. Not a troubled person. Not someone experimenting with the occult or going through a crisis. Just a young woman starting her life. Normal. Happy. Full. The changes started small, according to Catherine's account. Megan stopped sleeping through the night. She said she kept waking up at the same time, 3:14 a.m., with the sensation that someone was standing in the corner of her bedroom. Not a feeling, she told her mother. A certainty. She could feel the weight of someone's attention on her, the way you feel someone staring at you in a crowded room. She would turn on the light, see nothing, and lie there until morning with her eyes open. Then she stopped eating. Not in the way someone with an eating disorder stops eating. She would sit at the table, pick up her fork, and then stare at the food as if she didn't understand what it was. One evening, Catherine told me, Megan picked up a piece of chicken with her bare hand, held it up to the light, examined it like a specimen, and set it back down on her plate without saying a word. When her mother asked if she was okay, Megan looked at her and said, "It's not time yet." She had no memory of saying this when asked about it the next day. There was something else too. Catherine mentioned it almost as an afterthought, the way people mention the most important things. She said that Megan's cat, Oliver, had stopped going upstairs. The cat would sit at the bottom of the staircase and stare up at the second floor, unblinking, for hours. If you picked him up and carried him upstairs, he would go rigid, not struggling, not scratching, just completely stiff like a board, and the moment you set him down, he would bolt back downstairs so fast his claws left marks on the hardwood. Catherine said this started the same week Megan stopped sleeping. Animals know. That's something I learned early in this work. Whatever filter human beings have, whatever psychological mechanism allows us to explain away the things that don't fit, animals don't have it. They perceive what's there and they react accordingly. When a cat refuses to enter a room, you should pay attention. Father Aletta had visited the Bellows home twice before he called me. On his first visit, he described an ordinary-looking house, a worried family, and a young woman who seemed tired and distracted but otherwise fine. He prayed with them, blessed the house, and left feeling like maybe the family just needed some reassurance. He told me he stopped on the way home and got a coffee and sat in the parking lot of a gas station for 20 minutes, just breathing, because something about the visit had unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. Not anything specific. Just a vague, persistent sense of wrongness, like a word on the tip of your tongue that you can't quite remember. On his second visit, a week later, he called me from his car in their driveway and I could hear it in his voice. Not fear exactly, but something close. Something that sounded like a man trying very hard to sound calm while his hands shook. He told me that when he arrived at the house, every window on the second floor was open. It was 41 degrees outside. Catherine was sitting on the front steps in a coat, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She told him that Megan had opened all the windows in the middle of the night and that when Catherine tried to close them, Megan had grabbed her wrist. Gently, she said, almost lovingly, and told her, "They need to hear." Catherine asked who needed to hear. Megan smiled and said, "Everyone who's coming." When Father Aletta went upstairs to see Megan, she was sitting cross-legged on her bed in a t-shirt and shorts, seemingly unbothered by the freezing air pouring through the windows. He said the room smelled wrong. Not like anything rotten or foul. More like something chemical, almost metallic, like the air before a lightning strike. Megan looked at him and, before he could say anything, recited the first 4 lines of a prayer he had written himself, privately in his personal journal, a prayer he had never shared with anyone. She recited it in Latin, a language she did not speak. That's when he called me. I arrived at the Bellows home on a Tuesday evening. Catherine met me at the door, and I could see immediately that she was a woman holding herself together by sheer willpower. Her eyes had that glassy, unfocused quality of someone running on adrenaline and prayer. She walked me through the house, which was clean and well kept, though I noticed small things. A crucifix in the living room had been turned upside down, not dramatically, not as a display. Just rotated, as if someone had casually reached up and flipped it while walking past. There were scratches on the inside of the bathroom door, thin and deliberate, like tally marks. Catherine said she didn't know when they appeared. Megan's older brother, Thomas, was standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed. He didn't say much to me. I could tell he was skeptical, probably thought this was all a waste of time, that his sister needed a doctor, not a priest. I didn't blame him. I had thought the same thing in most of my cases. I told him I wasn't there to replace medical care, that the diocese required a full medical and psychiatric evaluation before I could proceed with anything, and that I'd reviewed the reports from Megan's doctors. 2 separate physicians and 1 psychiatrist had examined her over the previous month. Their findings were unremarkable. No signs of psychosis. No neurological abnormalities. No substance use. One of the doctors had written in his notes, almost as an afterthought, patient presents as fundamentally well, though effect seems inconsistent with reported symptoms. I went upstairs to meet Megan. Catherine came with me but stopped at the doorway to her daughter's room, and I noticed she wouldn't cross the threshold. She stood there with one hand on the doorframe, as if there were an invisible barrier she couldn't bring herself to pass through. The room was ordinary. Bed, desk, bookshelf. A poster from some band I didn't recognize. A stuffed animal on the pillow. And Megan sitting in a chair by the window looking out at the backyard. She turned when I entered, and for a moment she looked exactly like what she was. A tired young woman in need of help. She smiled at me, and the smile was real, genuine, even warm. "You must be Father Marin," she said. Her voice was completely normal. "I am." "And you're Megan." "I am." I sat on the edge of her bed, maybe 6 feet from her, and we talked. For nearly an hour we just talked. She told me about her cat, about the job she was supposed to start in January, about a trip to Maine she'd taken with friends the previous summer. She was articulate, thoughtful, self-aware. At one point, she laughed at a joke I made about my terrible sense of direction, and the laugh was so natural, so unguarded, that I found myself wondering if this had all been a misunderstanding. Maybe the family was under stress. Maybe Megan had gone through a depressive episode and they'd interpreted it through a religious lens. Then I mentioned the open windows. The change wasn't immediate. It was more like watching a cloud pass over the sun. Her expression didn't shift all at once. First, her smile faded. Then her eyes, which had been bright and focused, seemed to drift to a point just over my left shoulder. She went very still. Not the stillness of someone who is thinking. The stillness of someone who is listening. "Megan?" I said. She blinked. When she looked at me again, something was different. The warmth was gone. Not replaced by hostility, replaced by nothing. Her face was blank, neutral, the way a house looks after the family has moved out and all the pictures have been taken off the walls. Same structure, but empty. "They were already open when I woke up," she said in a tone that was flat and precise. "I didn't open them. Your mother said." "My mother is afraid," Megan said. "She should be." I waited. She turned back to the window. "There's something in the yard," she said. "You can't see it now. It only comes when the light is right. But it stands there, near the fence, and it watches. It doesn't have a face exactly. More like a place where a face should be. And sometimes when it's been there for a long time, the grass underneath it turns black." I looked out the window. The yard was empty. Just dry autumn grass and a wooden fence. But I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Near the far corner of the fence, there was a patch of ground, maybe 3 feet in diameter, where the grass was dead. Not brown the way grass dies in fall. Black. As if it had been burned. I didn't mention it to Catherine when I came downstairs. I told her I'd like to come back the following day, and that I wanted to bring some materials. She didn't ask what kind of materials. She just nodded. That night, in my motel room, I reviewed my notes and tried to approach this rationally. There were elements that fit the standard profile of what the church considers grounds for further investigation. Knowledge of hidden things, Father Aletta's private prayer, aversion to sacred objects, the inverted crucifix, personality changes, and what we call preternatural strength of knowledge, meaning the ability to know things the person could not possibly know. But there were also things that didn't fit. The possession cases I'd seen before had a quality of violence to them, a sense that the person was being overtaken, overwhelmed, a war being fought inside their body. Megan didn't feel like that. She felt like someone who had been quietly, patiently infiltrated. Not conquered. Inhabited. I called Father Aletta that night and asked him to describe as precisely as he could the smell in Megan's room. He paused for a long time before answering. "It was like ozone," he said. "Like the air after a transformer blows. But underneath that, something older. Like wet stone. Like the inside of a cave." I asked him if he'd felt afraid. Another long pause. "No," he said. "That's what scared me. I should have been afraid and I wasn't. I felt calm. Too calm. Like something was telling me there was nothing to worry about." That was the detail that made me call the bishop's office the next morning and request authorization to proceed with the rite. Because that's the thing most people don't understand about real demonic activity. The movies get it backwards. The most dangerous entities don't make you afraid. They make you comfortable. They make you feel like everything is fine, like there's a perfectly reasonable explanation, like you should just relax and stop worrying. Fear is a gift from God. It tells you when something is wrong. The thing that truly terrified me about Megan's case was how natural everything felt. How easy it would have been to walk away and tell Catherine her daughter just needed rest. I went back the next afternoon with Father Aletta and a deacon from the diocese named Patrick Corwin. The church requires at least one witness during the rite, and Patrick was a steady, unflappable man in his 60s who had assisted me twice before. I trusted him completely. Catherine let us in. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No television, no hum of the refrigerator, no ambient sounds of a living home. It was as if the house had been put on mute. Thomas was not there. Catherine said he'd gone to stay with a friend. She said it carefully, and I understood what she wasn't saying, that Thomas had refused to be in the house. We went upstairs. Megan was in her room lying on the bed this time, staring at the ceiling. She didn't acknowledge us when we entered. I set down my bag, the stole, the holy water, the ritual text, a crucifix, and began to prepare the room. I asked Patrick to place a crucifix on the wall above the doorway. The moment his hand touched the wall, Megan sat up. Not the way a person sits up in bed, using their arms, shifting their weight. She rose from the waist, like a hinge folding, her legs perfectly straight, her upper body lifting to a 90-degree angle without any apparent muscular effort. It was so smooth and so wrong that Patrick took a step back and nearly dropped the crucifix. Megan looked at him, then at me, then at Father Aletta. "Three of you," she said. But her voice was different now. It was still her voice, but it had a quality underneath it, a resonance like two recordings of the same word played a fraction of a second apart. "Three of you for little old me. I'm flattered." "Megan," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I'd like to pray with you if that's all right." She tilted her head. The movement was too far, too slow. Her head went to an angle that made the tendons in her neck stand out like cables, and she held it there, studying me with an expression of amused curiosity. "You don't have to ask," she said. "You're going to do it anyway." I began with the Litany of the Saints. This is standard, a long, deliberate prayer that calls upon the communion of saints for intercession. It's meant to establish sacred ground, to invoke divine authority before addressing whatever is present. I had recited it dozens of times over the years. I could do it from memory, and I did, standing at the foot of Megan's bed while Father Aletta stood behind me and Patrick held his position by the door. For the first several minutes, nothing happened. Megan lay back down and closed her eyes as if she were settling in for a nap. I continued through the litany. I reached the section that calls upon Christ directly, "From all evil, deliver us, O Lord," and that's when the first thing happened. Every light in the room went out. Not a power outage, I could still hear the faint hum of the house's electrical system. The bulbs simply stopped producing light, as if something had reached inside each one and pinched the filament. The room plunged into a darkness so complete that for a moment I couldn't see my own hands. Then the window provided a pale gray twilight as my eyes adjusted, and I saw Megan. She was standing. I hadn't heard her get up. She was standing at the head of the bed, facing me, and her eyes were open. But they weren't right. They were too wide, the lids pulled back so far that I could see the white all the way around her irises. And her irises, which had been a normal hazel, were dark. Not black. Dark, the way deep water looks when you shine a flashlight into it and the beam just disappears. "Keep going," she said. The voice was layered now. Underneath Megan's voice was another one, lower, almost guttural, speaking the same words a half beat behind, like an echo that arrived too late. "Keep going, David. I want to hear the rest." She knew my first name. I had introduced myself only as Father Marin. Catherine had called me Father. Father Aletta had called me Father. Nobody in that house had used my first name. I continued. I moved from the litany into the preliminary prayers and then into the first exorcism prayer itself. I won't reproduce the full text here, it's not something I feel comfortable spreading around casually, but the core of it is a direct command, spoken in the authority of Christ, demanding that the unclean spirit identify itself and depart. When I spoke those words, Megan began to shake. Not a tremor. A vibration like a tuning fork struck against a table. Her whole body hummed with it, and the bed behind her began to rattle against the floor. Then she opened her mouth, and a sound came out that I will hear for the rest of my life. It was not a scream. It was not a growl. It was a voice, a human voice, an old man's voice, speaking in a language I did not recognize. It poured out of her with a volume that should not have been possible from a young woman's body, filling the room, pressing against my eardrums like a physical force. And behind that voice, underneath it, I could hear others, whispering. Dozens of them, layered on top of each other like pages in a book, each one saying something different, and I caught fragments. My mother's name, the address of the seminary where I'd trained, a phrase in Italian that I hadn't heard since I was a child, my grandmother's voice, her exact intonation saying "Vieni qua tesoro," "Come here, sweetheart." That stopped me. For 3 full seconds, I stood there with the ritual text in my hand and my mouth open, because I had heard my dead grandmother's voice coming from this girl's mouth, and it was perfect. Every note, every inflection, the slight rasp she developed in her later years. Perfect. Patrick touched my arm. "David," he said quietly. "Continue." I continued. I commanded the entity to give its name as the rite requires. Megan, or whatever was using Megan, went still. The shaking stopped. The whispers stopped. The room was so quiet I could hear my own pulse. Then Megan smiled. It was the worst thing I had ever seen. It was her smile, the same warm, genuine smile she'd given me the day before, but it was being worn the way you'd wear a mask. Whatever was behind it was not smiling. Whatever was behind it was showing me that it could put on Megan's face whenever it wanted, like a costume, and there was nothing I could do about it. "You want my name," she said. The layered voice was gone. It was just Megan now, her regular voice, her regular face, and somehow that was worse. "Which one?" "I have so many." "You have a list in your book, Father. A catalog of names your church has collected over centuries. Little labels for things you don't understand. You could pick one. Any one. I'll answer to it. It doesn't matter." "In the name of Jesus Christ," I said, "I command you to." "Jesus Christ," she repeated, and the way she said it was not mocking. It was weary, tired. The way you'd say the name of someone you've known for a very long time, someone you've grown bored of. "He is not here, David. You keep calling, but he is not here. You know that, don't you? Somewhere deep down, in that little room inside your chest where you keep the things you won't look at, you know he's not listening." I will tell you honestly that those words hit me harder than anything I'd encountered in 17 years of ministry. Not because I believed them, but because of the way she said them, with such quiet, patient certainty, as if she were not attacking my faith but simply pointing out something obvious that I'd been too polite to acknowledge. I pressed on. I sprinkled holy water. When it touched Megan's skin, she hissed, not a dramatic Hollywood hiss, but a sharp intake of breath, the way you'd react to a spark landing on your hand. Red marks appeared on her forearms where the water had landed, raised and angry as if her skin was allergic to it. But she didn't scream. She didn't thrash. She just looked at the marks and then looked at me with an expression I can only describe as pity. "You're trying so hard," she said. "You really are. And I appreciate the effort, David, I do. But you brought a candle to fight the dark. And you don't even know what the dark is." The exorcism continued for 3 hours that first night. I will spare you the full account of every prayer, every response, every escalation. What I will tell you is this. Over the course of those 3 hours, the entity inside Megan demonstrated capabilities that I had never encountered and that the training documents from the Vatican do not adequately describe. It knew things about Patrick, details of his first marriage that he had never told anyone, the name of a woman he'd had an affair with 30 years earlier, the date it ended, and what he had said to her the last time they spoke. Patrick, this unshakable man in his 60s, left the room at one point and I could hear him weeping in the hallway. When he came back in, his face was gray and his hands were trembling, but he took his position by the door and nodded at me to continue. That took more courage than anything I've ever done. At some point during the second hour, the scratching started again. Not inside one wall this time, inside all of them. Every wall in the room. The ceiling too. A constant, grinding rasp as if the entire room were encased in something alive and restless. And then the scratching formed a rhythm. A pattern. And I realized, with a sick lurch of recognition, that the pattern was the melody of the hymn Megan used to play with the folk group at St. Jerome's. The walls were humming her song back to her. It recited passages from a letter Father Auletta had written to his dying mother, a letter that existed only in his desk drawer at the rectory 12 miles away. It recited them in Father Auletta's handwriting. I know that sounds impossible. What I mean is that Megan picked up a pen from her desk and, without looking, wrote lines from the letter on the wall in handwriting that Father Auletta later confirmed was identical to his own. She wrote them backwards, right to left, without hesitation, without lifting the pen, as if the letters were flowing through her from somewhere else entirely. Made the house move. Not metaphorically. I mean the house itself, the structure, the foundation, shifted. The floor tilted by maybe 2 degrees, just enough to make the furniture slide slightly and to make you feel off balance without understanding why. Catherine, who was downstairs, later told me that every picture on the ground floor wall swung to the left at the same time, as if the entire house had been nudged by an enormous hand. And then, near the end of the third hour, something happened that changed everything. I was deep into the final adjuration, the most powerful prayer in the rite, the one that directly invokes the authority of God to cast out the demon. My voice was raw. Sweat was running down my temples. I was gripping the crucifix so hard my knuckles were white. And as I spoke the words, Megan's body began to rise. Not levitation the way you're imagining. Her body didn't float gently upward. Her back arched first, bowing upward from the bed as if she were being pulled by a hook in her sternum. Her arms hung limp at her sides. Her head fell back, her mouth open. And then, slowly, with the sound of the bed creaking and the sheets sliding off her, she rose. 6 inches. A foot. 2 feet off the mattress, suspended, her body curved like a bow, and the only sound in the room was a low, continuous vibration. Not a hum, more like the resonance of a bass string plucked in an enormous, empty cathedral. I kept praying. I shouted the words now. The air in the room was freezing. My breath came out in clouds. Frost was forming on the window glass, crystallizing in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like writing. And then Megan's head snapped forward and she looked directly at me. She was still suspended in the air, her body bent at an angle that should have been agonizing, and she looked at me with an expression of absolute clarity, and she spoke in a voice that was not hers and was not the entity's. It was a third voice. A new voice. Deep and vast and ancient, and it said a single sentence. I am not the one inside her. The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered. The meaning didn't register immediately. I was so focused on the rite, so deep in the rhythm of the prayers, that my mind processed the sound before the content. But Father Aletta understood immediately. I heard him make a sound, a small strangled gasp, and when I looked at him, his face was white. David, he whispered. David, stop. Megan collapsed back onto the bed. The lights came on. The temperature normalized in seconds as if someone had turned a dial. The frost on the window melted instantly, running down the glass in thin streams. And Megan lay there, curled on her side, breathing normally, looking like a young woman who had just woken from a deep and dreamless sleep. She looked at me and said in her own voice, completely lucid, I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my motel room with the lights on and the television playing something I didn't watch, and I turned that sentence over and over in my mind. I'm not the one inside her. In traditional demonology, when you confront an entity during exorcism, you are speaking to the thing that has taken up residence in the person. You command it to identify itself. You command it to leave. The entire structure of the rite is built on this premise, that there is an invader and you are expelling it. But what that voice said, that third voice, the one that came from somewhere deeper than Megan, deeper than whatever had been speaking through her, implied something that made the ground shift under everything I believed. It implied that the entity I had been fighting was not the real threat, that it was a mask, a puppet, a distraction, and that the actual presence, the thing controlling everything, was not inside Megan at all. It was somewhere else. I called my mentor that night, a retired exorcist named Monsignor Frederick Crane, who was 81 years old and living in a care facility in Baltimore. I had studied under him for 3 years, and he was the most knowledgeable person I knew on the subject of demonic intervention. When I described what had happened, there was a silence on the line so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, David, I need you to listen to me very carefully. There are cases, and I have only heard of this, I have never seen it personally, where the possession is not the event. It is the invitation. The person is not the target. The person is the door. The door to what? I asked. To whoever is in the room with them, he said. And then, get out of that house, David. Do not go back. I should have listened to him. I want you to understand that I know I should have listened to him. But I had seen Megan's face, her real face, the face of a 23-year-old woman who wanted to be an elementary school teacher, and I could not walk away from her. I told myself it was pastoral duty. I told myself it was faith. Now, looking back, I wonder if I was already being guided, if the choice to go back was ever really mine. I returned to the Bellows house the next afternoon. This time I came alone. Father Aletta had called the diocese that morning and asked to be removed from the case. He didn't give a reason and I didn't press him. His voice on the phone was thin and distant, and when I asked if he was all right, he said, I keep hearing the whispering, David. Even here. Even in my own rectory. She said things, it said things, about my mother that nobody knows. Nobody. And I can't stop hearing them. I told him I understood. I told him to take care of himself. I didn't tell him that I, too, had heard things in my motel room that night. A faint tapping on the bathroom mirror at 3:14 a.m. The smell of ozone when I opened my eyes. The sensation of breath on the back of my neck that lingered for several seconds after I sat up. Patrick agreed to come, but when he arrived at the house, he got out of his car, stood in the driveway staring at the front door for nearly a full minute, then got back in and drove away. He didn't speak to me. He didn't wave. He just sat in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead with both hands on the wheel, and then he reversed out of the driveway with the careful precision of someone trying very hard not to look at the house. He texted me later, "I can't explain it. I felt like the house was watching me. Not a person inside the house. The house itself. The walls. The roof. The windows. All of it focused on me like one enormous eye. I am sorry, David." I never spoke to Patrick again. He died of a heart attack 6 weeks later at his desk in the middle of writing a letter. He was 63 years old and had no prior history of cardiac problems. The letter was addressed to me. The diocese sent me his personal effects and I have the letter. It is 1 page. Most of it is normal. He asks how I'm doing, mentions the weather, says he's been praying for Megan. The handwriting starts firm and clear, the way Patrick always wrote, with his characteristic forward lean. But in the last paragraph the letters begin to shake. The lines drift downward on the page. Words are crossed out and rewritten. And the last line, barely legible, reads, "There is something in my house now, David. I brought it home with me. It stands in the hallway at night and I can hear it breathing." I've never told anyone about that letter. When I entered the Bellows home that day, Catherine was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked at me and said very calmly, "She knows you're here. She's been talking about you all morning." "What has she been saying?" I asked. "She says you're the one she's been waiting for." Something shifted inside me when Catherine said those words. Not fear. Something colder, something that settled in the pit of my stomach like a stone dropped into still water. I went upstairs. The hallway was different that day. I don't mean the furniture had been rearranged or the paint had changed color. I mean the hallway itself felt different, longer than it should have been, the walls slightly closer together as if the house had tightened around me. The door to Megan's room was open, and even from the hallway I could feel it. A pressure and atmospheric density, like the air in the room was heavier than the air in the rest of the house. Megan was standing in the center of the room. She was facing the wall, her back to me, her arms at her sides. She was whispering. I couldn't make out the words. I stepped closer and the whispering stopped. "Close the door, David," she said without turning around. Her voice was calm, conversational, as if she were asking me to pass the salt. But there was something underneath it, a current of urgency that didn't match the words. I did not close the door. "Close the door," she said again. "This part is just for you. What I'm about to tell you, it can't hear me if the door is closed. It's the only barrier that still works. Please." Against every instinct, against every protocol, against everything Monsignor Crane had taught me, I closed the door. I have asked myself 1,000 times why I did that. The honest answer is that I felt compelled. Not forced. Compelled. As if closing the door was the most natural, the most logical, the most necessary thing in the world. And there was something else too. She had said please. Megan had said please, in a voice that was so clearly her own, so clearly frightened, so clearly the voice of a young woman asking for help, that I couldn't refuse. Whether that was her speaking or the thing manipulating me through her, I still don't know. That's the cruelty of it. You can never be sure which moments were real. Megan turned around. She looked normal. Tired but normal. And she said in her own voice quietly, "Father, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you what's really happening." "I'm listening," I said. "It's not inside me," she said. "I mean there's something inside me. I can feel it. It's like there's a hand inside a puppet and the hand is moving me around sometimes, making me say things. But the hand belongs to someone. And that someone is not in me. She paused. Her eyes welled up. "It's in the house, Father. It's in the walls. It's in the floors. It's been here longer than my family. Longer than this building. It lives in this place and I'm just how it talks. It uses me the way you'd use a telephone. To reach out. To communicate. But it doesn't live in me. What does it want?" I asked. Megan looked at me, and in that moment she was entirely herself. Frightened, exhausted, clear-eyed and desperate. "It wants you," she said. "It's been calling for someone like you for a very long time. Someone who would come into the house and try to fight it. Someone who would open the channel. The exorcism doesn't expel it, Father. The exorcism feeds it. Every prayer you say, every invocation, every time you call on the power of God inside these walls, it eats that. It grows from it. You are not casting it out. You are waking it up." The room went cold. Not gradually. Instantly. As if every molecule of warmth had been vacuumed out at once. My breath crystallized in front of my face. The window cracked, a single line running from the bottom corner to the center with a sound like a finger snapping. And Megan's face changed. Not her expression. Her face. The bones seemed to shift beneath the skin, her jaw widening, her brow thickening, her features rearranging into something that was almost Megan but wasn't quite. The way a reflection in a funhouse mirror is almost you but wrong in ways you can't articulate. And that third voice, the deep one, the vast one, came from her mouth but also from the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling, from everywhere. She's right, David. I have been waiting for you. Not for her. Not for any of them. For you. Because you are the one who believes enough to open the door, and doubts enough to step through it. I don't remember the next part clearly. My memory fragments. I remember dropping the ritual text. I remember the crucifix in my hand becoming so hot that I dropped it too, and it landed on the carpet and the carpet began to smolder where it touched. I remember the door behind me slamming, not closing, slamming with a force that rattled the frame. I remember Megan's body convulsing, not like a seizure, but rhythmically as if something inside her was stretching, testing the limits of her body the way you'd test the seams of a garment you'd outgrown. I remember the walls. The walls were moving. Not visibly, not in a way I could point to, but I could feel them breathing, expanding and contracting by millimeters, the whole room pulsing like the inside of a living thing. And I remember the sound. A sound that I have never been able to adequately describe, because there is no reference point for it in normal human experience. The closest I can come is this: imagine every voice that has ever existed, every voice that has ever spoken or whispered or screamed, all compressed into a single tone, a single frequency, and that frequency is directed at you personally like a searchlight made of sound. It filled my head. It pressed against the inside of my skull. It was not painful. It was intimate. It was the sound of something knowing you completely, down to the last thought you've ever had, and being utterly indifferent to all of it. I ran. I'm not ashamed to say it. I turned, I pulled the door open. It resisted as if the handle were being gripped from the other side, but it opened, and I ran. Down the hallway, which was wrong now, too long, the walls closer together than before, the lights flickering in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, almost like a signal. Down the stairs, where Catherine was standing in the foyer looking up at me with an expression that I will never forget, because it was not surprise. It was resignation. As if she had known this would happen. As if she had been waiting for me to figure out what she already knew. I went past her, out the front door into the driveway, where the air was normal and the sky was gray and the trees were losing their leaves in the wind. I stood there with my hands on my knees, breathing, and I realized that my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't straighten my fingers. The rosary in my pocket had broken. I don't know when. The beads were loose, scattered inside the lining of my coat, and the little silver crucifix was gone. I looked back at the house. Every window on the second floor was open again. And standing in Megan's window, barely visible in the failing afternoon light, was a shape. Not Megan. Something taller, thinner, with proportions that didn't match any human body. It stood there, motionless, and even from the driveway, even from that distance, I could feel it looking at me. Not watching. Looking. Into me. Through me. As if it were reading me the way I would read a page of text. I got in my car and I drove away. I didn't go back to the Bellows house. I called the diocese from my motel room that night and told them I was unable to continue the case. They asked why. I said I was ill. They asked if they should send someone else. I said no. I said it with a vehemence that surprised even me. I told them that nobody should go into that house. I told them that the situation was not what we thought it was. The bishop's assistant, a polished young Monsignor named Gerald, asked me to clarify. I tried. I tried to explain what Megan had told me, what the voice had said, what I had felt. Gerald listened patiently and then said, very diplomatically, that it sounded like I might benefit from some rest. I never learned what happened to Megan. The diocese reassigned the case. I heard through channels that another priest, someone from out of state, visited the house several weeks later. I tried to find out what happened during his visit. Nobody would tell me. The case file was sealed. The only piece of information I was able to obtain, through a friend who worked in the archives, was a single notation on the file's cover page. Case unresolved. Subject relocated. No further action. Subject relocated. Those two words have haunted me. Relocated to where? A hospital? A facility? And if the thing inside that house was not inside Megan, if she was right, if it lived in the walls, in the structure, in the ground itself, then relocating Megan wouldn't solve anything. The house would still be there. The thing would still be there. Waiting. I resigned from active ministry 3 weeks later. The official letter was 2 sentences. I submitted it, turned in my vestments, packed up my office at the rectory, and drove home to my apartment. I sat in my car in the parking lot for an hour before going inside. I was not ready to face the silence of an empty room, because I had begun to notice something that had started on the drive home from Warwick and had grown steadily worse over the following days. The scratching. It was faint at first. A light rasping sound, barely audible, easy to dismiss as a mouse in the wall or a branch against the siding. But it followed me. It was in my motel room. It was in my car. It was in my apartment. And it came from the same place every time, inside the wall, just behind wherever I was sitting or standing, slightly to my left, slightly behind me. Exactly where it had been in the hallway of the Bellows house the first night I visited. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was traumatized, that my nervous system was still in overdrive, that the human brain is remarkably good at generating phantom sounds when it's under stress. I told myself all of this, and I almost believed it until the night I woke up at 3:14 in the morning. I was lying in bed in the dark and I was suddenly completely awake. Not groggy, not confused. Alert. And I knew, with the same iron certainty that Megan had described, that something was standing in the corner of my room. I couldn't see it. The room was too dark. But I could feel the weight of its attention, a physical pressure on the side of my face like standing too close to a bonfire. I turned on the light. The room was empty. But on the wall opposite my bed, near the baseboard, there was a mark that had not been there when I went to sleep. A handprint. Not a full handprint, for long thin fingers and no thumb, pressed into the paint hard enough to leave a slight depression, as if the wall were soft and something had leaned against it. The fingers were too long, by at least 3 inches, and they were pointing toward my bed. I moved apartments the following month. The handprint appeared in the new apartment within a week. Same wall, same position, same long, impossible fingers. I tried other things. I had the apartment blessed by a deacon I knew from another diocese, someone who didn't know my history. The moment he began the blessing, the scratching exploded into a frenzy, a cacophony of rasping, clawing, scraping from every surface, so loud that the deacon stopped mid-prayer and looked at me with wide eyes. "What is that?" he asked. I told him it was old pipes. He didn't believe me. He finished the blessing quickly, almost rushing through the words, and left without making eye contact. The scratching returned to its normal, quiet rhythm within the hour, as if it had been annoyed by the interruption and was now settling back in. I tried silence. I stopped all religious practice. No prayer, no scripture, no sacred music. I removed every religious object from my apartment. Every crucifix, every icon, every holy card my mother had given me over the years. I put them all in a box and left the box in a storage unit across town. For 2 days the scratching stopped completely. The silence was so sudden and so total that it was almost worse. I lay awake those 2 nights, straining to hear it, because at least the scratching was a known quantity. At least it was predictable. The silence felt like something holding its breath. On the 3rd day I came home from work and found the box on my kitchen table. The storage unit was 7 miles away. The box was sealed. The lock on my front door showed no signs of tampering. Inside the box, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. Every crucifix, there were 4 of them, had been turned upside down. Not broken, not defaced. Just inverted. Gently. Almost lovingly. I'm not a priest anymore. I don't pray. I tried, in the months after Warwick, and each time I began, each time I formed the words in my mouth, each time I reached for God, the scratching got louder. As if the act of prayer was a signal. As if it was listening for exactly that, the way a predator listens for the sound of its prey moving through underbrush. I stopped praying and the scratching softened. It's still there. Every day. Every night. A constant, faint rasping from inside whatever wall is closest to me. I've learned to live with it. I've learned to sleep with it the way you learn to sleep next to a highway. Your brain files it away as background noise, and most nights you barely notice it. But sometimes, usually late, usually when I'm tired, usually when I've been thinking about Megan or Catherine or Patrick or the house, the scratching changes. It gets slower, more deliberate, and it moves. It tracks me through the room, staying just behind me and to my left, and in those moments, I know it's not in the wall. It's showing me that it's not in the wall. It's showing me that it's right there, inches from me, separated by nothing, and the wall is just where it chooses to put the sound. I spoke to Monsignor Crane one last time, about a year after everything happened. He was in the hospital by then, failing quickly. I sat by his bed and told him everything. He listened with his eyes closed, and when I finished he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that I think about every single day. "The great mistake," he said, is believing that the enemy wants your soul. He doesn't. Your soul is incidental. What he wants is your attention, your awareness. He wants to be seen. Because to be seen is to be real. And to be real is to have power. You looked at it, David. You saw it. And now you can't unsee it. That's not a haunting. That's a relationship. Monsignor Crane died 4 days later. In his sleep, they said, peacefully. But the nurse who found him told a friend of mine who told me that when they discovered his body, every drawer in his room was open. Every cabinet. Every closet door. As if something had gone through the room searching for something. And on the wall above his bed, scratched into the paint with what appeared to be fingernails, were 4 words. Thank you for listening. I live alone now. I work a quiet job at a hardware store. The owner is a kind man who doesn't ask questions, and the work is physical enough to keep my mind occupied during the day. I don't talk about what happened except here, except now. I keep the lights on at night. All of them. My electric bill is absurd. I've covered the walls with bookshelves not because I think it will stop anything, but because I don't want to see the handprints anymore. They still appear. On the shelf backs behind the books. I find them when I'm reorganizing. Long fingers, no thumb, always pointing toward wherever I sleep. Some nights are worse than others. Some nights I'll be sitting on my couch, reading or staring at the television, and the temperature will drop. Just slightly. Just enough that I notice. And I'll feel it, that pressure, that atmospheric density, like the air in the room has become heavier, and I'll know that something is there, standing just behind me, just to my left, in the exact spot where the scratching always originates. I don't turn around anymore. I used to. In the early months, I would whip around, heart hammering, expecting to see something. I never did. But the feeling, the weight of attention, the sensation of being examined by something patient and thorough, would linger for hours. Now I just sit very still and wait for it to pass. And it always does. Eventually. But it always comes back. I don't know what I let in. I don't know if it followed me from that house or if it was always coming for me and Megan was simply the mechanism, the bait, the lure designed to draw someone like me into that room to say those prayers and open that door. I don't know if Megan is okay. I think about her constantly. I tried to find her once, about 2 years after everything happened. I drove to the Bellows house. It was empty. Not for sale, not abandoned. Just empty. The windows were intact, the yard was maintained, the mailbox had the family name still on it. But no one answered the door, and when I peered through the front window, the house was furnished and tidy, as if the family had stepped out for groceries and would be back any minute. There was a cup of coffee on the kitchen counter. Steam was rising from it. I left and didn't go back. I think about Catherine standing in the foyer, watching me run, with that look on her face. The look of someone who had tried to warn me in the only way she could. I think about Thomas, who had the good sense to leave and never return. I think about Patrick, dead at his desk, surrounded by open drawers and a letter he never finished. I think about Father Aletta, who removed himself from the case and, last I heard, transferred to a mission parish in rural Guatemala, as far from Warwick as he could get without leaving the continent. And I think about what the voice said. You are the one who believes enough to open the door and doubts enough to step through it. Because that's the cruelest part. It wasn't wrong. I did believe. I did doubt. And somewhere in the space between those two things, between my faith and my uncertainty, something found a crack wide enough to slip through. Not into Megan. Into me. There is one more thing I need to tell you. Something I have never told anyone, and something I have been avoiding this entire time because saying it out loud makes it real in a way I'm not sure I'm ready for. About 3 months after I left the priesthood, I was shaving one morning, standing at the bathroom mirror, and I looked at my reflection. Just looked. And for a fraction of a second, so brief I almost convinced myself it didn't happen, my reflection didn't move with me. I tilted my head to the left and the reflection stayed still. It was looking at me. Not with my eyes. With eyes that were mine but darker, deeper, with something behind them that was patient and amused and very, very old. Then it tilted its head, matching mine, and everything was normal again. I haven't looked in a mirror since. I shave by touch. I comb my hair by feel. I cover the bathroom mirror with a towel and I keep a piece of cardboard over the rearview mirror in my car. People think it's strange. My barber thinks I'm eccentric. My coworkers think I'm odd. None of them understand that I'm not afraid of what I might see in the mirror. I'm afraid of what might see me back. I was trained to face evil. I was ordained, educated, authorized, experienced. I walked into that house with the full authority of the Catholic Church behind me, with centuries of tradition and prayer at my disposal, with the unshakable conviction that God's power was greater than anything the darkness could produce. I walked out with none of it. Last week, I woke up at 3:14 in the morning as I do most nights, and I lay in the dark listening to the scratching. But this time, something was different. This time, underneath the scratching, I heard a voice. Faint. Distant. Coming from inside the wall or from somewhere much further away, I couldn't tell. And it was saying my name. Not Father Marin. Not David. It was saying my name in my grandmother's voice. Vienika Tesoro. Come here, sweetheart. And God help me. I almost answered. I almost opened my mouth in my dark apartment, alone at 3 in the morning, and answered the thing wearing my grandmother's voice. I felt the word forming on my tongue. I felt my lips parting. And something, I don't know what, some last shred of the man I used to be, some residual grace I don't deserve, stopped me. I pressed my hand over my mouth and I held it there until the urge passed. The scratching continued until dawn. It always does.